Yeah, she's related to her name. I'll find out.
On the TV or no? Cool. Thank you, everybody. My name is Christopher Rosenquist. I'm the mayor here in the city of Plattsburgh. Great to see so many people here. A lot of the influencers that we do have in the community who have come to contribute to probably one of the most important tasks that the city will undertake that will contribute to the next 34 years of economic growth, focus on housing, commercial expansion, as well as community building. The zoning and planning laws in the city of Plattsburgh are quite old. We just went through a 1.5-year process to revamp the comprehensive master plan, which these code changes will follow up with how to implement and execute that master plan. So I appreciate your contribution. I do hope that you all continue to be in this conversation and continue to contribute to this conversation and to the redesign of the code here in the city of Plattsburgh. And again, just please stay involved, stay connected. Your advice and your feedback is critical to the future of our community. So I do appreciate y'all being here. Hand it off to the team here, and just big acknowledgments to the city planner, the senior planner here in the city, and the team that's been put together, as well as the councilors that are attending, and then the folks who are also watching online. So again, thank you for being here. I appreciate you, and I look forward to working with you all in the coming year as we get through this process. It's going to take a year, so just set expectations. Yeah, cool. Thanks, folks. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. And if you haven't signed in, please do sign in, because that also helps to know who we're engaging and how to re-engage with you. As well as a small plug, my city of Plattsburgh, ny.gov. This project is tracked on that website, and we do send regular updates on the progress of this project and other projects that we're managing throughout the city on that platform. It's a great way to engage, comment, get weekly updates. For those of you who use it to track the Market Street project, you probably got weekly updates on that project. Same thing with this project and other projects that we're undertaking in the city. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Matthew Rogers. I'm the project manager with Labella Associates, with a lead consultant assisting the city of Plattsburgh with the SmartCode update. I will do some introductions. This microphone is for a couple of people that are joining us online. So this is also through Zoom, and it is being recorded. So I just want everybody to know, full disclosure. So we have a fairly comprehensive discussion tonight, but I hope we'll leave some time for questions and answers. And then if you didn't get a chance or want to go back into the side room there to look at the information that we have and provide more comments, we'd love to do that between now and 7 o'clock. So as you can see, we have a pretty robust team here. As the mayor said, it's led on the city side by Alicia Bartlett and Shalise Marbut. With me tonight is Cornel Smith and Jamie Konkowski from Labella. We're also working closely with SmartCode, which is a company that specializes just in updating zoning ordinances, and they work throughout the United States, so we're happy that they're on our team. And Sidekick Creative, who has done a lot of work in the town and the city, they're fantastic graphic artists, and they're assisting with a lot of the promotional, and then going down the road with the graphic component of the zoning law. And then we have a series of designers, landscape architects, we also have architects that are on our team as well. A lot happens behind the scenes to get us here tonight. In addition to that, we have a great project advisory committee. I won't read all the names here, but it's a fantastic cross-section of city staff, planners, building department, planning board, zoning board, town of Plattsburgh, representation, city council, the county, Clinton County engineer representation as well. As well as student from the high school, which I think is probably one of the first student I've ever had on a committee of mine. So I'll point him out. There's Branson. Thank you, Branson, for volunteering your time. It is fantastic to get the perspective of everybody within the city, from teenager right on up to discuss these important issues. So we're happy to have him on board. So project timeline, we've been going at this for a few months now. We're just about to wrap up our diagnostic, our inventory analysis component of this, and it's being capstoned by this public informational session to present to you kind of what we've heard, where we're going, what the issues are that we've already identified, and our next steps. So we're here in October, believe it or not. It's crazy how quickly the summer is gone. And then our next steps will be a series of design workshops that'll start to focus on the different zoning districts, uses, density, and the design aspects of those. So those will occur over the next several months. And then we start to draft the code based upon all those input sessions and PAC meetings, the project advisory committee meetings. So looking forward to our screen that blocks the last few months, but looking to wrap this up in the summer and have this considered for adoption by the city council. So the foundation of this whole effort is the zoning and the subdivision regulations. As the mayor mentioned, the city's zoning regulations and subdivision laws are fairly old, 2001, with a series of updates over those years. And as you would imagine, as you update laws on an individual basis, it creates issues, just like you do anything. Certain references aren't correct, different perspectives, different purposes. So clearly now's the time for the city to take a comprehensive look at the code and pull it all together. So through the comprehensive planning process, we can move that the camera right there, the upper right hand corner. And this presentation, like I said, is being recorded, and we'll also have this up on the project website for people to take a look at if they weren't here. So the known issues with the code, it's difficult to navigate due to a lack of organization, which again is a product of, it's just an old code, and also when it goes through a series of revisions, it tends to create some inconsistencies. A lot of the standards are difficult to interpret, difficult to administer. It's really heavy on process and planning board, zoning board review, light on administrative review, which is more streamlined and more efficient. The area and bulk control, which that's just a fancy term for saying density, how many units can you get, what should your setbacks be, etc. They lack real historical context because they're not based on the built environment right now. So that's why we're taking a detailed look at every place in the city to get an understanding of what the density is, what the setbacks are. So when we go forward and begin revising that, it's more consistent with what's here, but also it takes into consideration what the comprehensive plan vision and goals identified. And then the additional chapters that we looked at are the building code enforcement, sewage and disposal, streets and sidewalks. And all of these chapters are within the city code that's available online. That goes from administrative stuff all the way down to zoning, everything in between. So there are several chapters in any municipal code that kind of work with each other, and that's why we have to make sure that if we change something in zoning, that doesn't have any adverse impacts to the other chapters. So the other real foundation going forward now is the comprehensive plan. So the city just adopted their new plan in September of this year. It's a fantastic feat. The city should be very proud of that. A lot of work went into it. And the first step in implementing a comprehensive plan, one of the first steps, is to update your zoning. And that's really the most exciting first step. That is tangible. But I think just based upon the turnout, we realize that zoning is more than just land use regulations. There's a lot of aspects in the zoning code that impacts everybody's daily life. And that's an important thing to recognize, and we're happy that people are that excited about it to turn out and provide us your input. The other aspect is local waterfront revitalization program that's being finalized, and there are a handful of regulatory components that will be implemented as well. We're aware of those. That's working its way through the approval and adoption process, but we're going to get a head start. We're going to begin to implement those as well. So the comprehensive plan identified over 35 code-related objectives and policies that we need to start with as a first step, because again, city law, general city law requires, and it's just like a town and for a village, that your land use regulations have to be brought into compliance with your comprehensive plan. And generally, comprehensive plans don't lead into specific zoning changes. It identifies issues, provides policy recommendations, so then we use that to help guide update to your code. So it's an important part that we're going to continually refer back to. Some of the goals and objectives that we know that the code should be a little bit more user-friendly, be easier to navigate, understand and administer, not only by city staff, the planning board, zoning board, but also the public and lay people that, that's not the world that you normally work in. And if you need to get a permit, you shouldn't necessarily have to hire a lawyer to figure out what it is that you need. So that's our goal, is to make it as straightforward as possible, recognizing that there are some limitations when we're talking about writing regulations. Utilize more modern, innovative approaches. So you may have heard the term form-based code. That was specifically recommended in the comprehensive plan, and form-based code or hybrid form-based code focuses a little bit more on what the project looks like, sets kind of envelopes of height and density, and a little less focus on use, and that could help incentivize infill development, particularly in your more urban areas, and allow for more streamlined reviews and approvals. Other opportunities are overlay districts, which the city does have some, but we can increase upon that, and that really depends on ultimately where we're going in terms of recommendations, issues that we deal with. And then the function use space, which is, and the wonky planning term for that is Euclidean zoning, which is zoning that's just based upon density and use and doesn't really take into consideration the design aspect and how it may impact a neighborhood or a commercial area. So utilizing more mixed use districts, and we'll talk about the current zoning districts right now, the makeup of those, the uses that are allowed, but any way we can continue to enhance that. And of course, anytime you open the paper, housing continues to get harder and harder to afford, whether that's purchasing or renting, and that the term missing middle housing is something that's kind of caught on. So it's, in the past, it was always considered you got a single family home or you got big apartments, and that it's important for communities to provide opportunities for that missing middle, duplexes, threeplexes, fourplexes, cottage courts, other alternative ways to allow for housing that is compatible with the neighborhood, and with the goal of eventually reducing the strain on the housing and hoping that the cost will come down and become a little bit more affordable and accessible. Addressing parking maximums, providing a little bit more flexibility. The current parking requirements tend to disincentivize residential growth, increases the cost. So we want to look at that to make sure that's not too much of a burden, streamlining where we can, and then looking to combine the subdivision and the zoning, and then whatever other chapters or sections of existing chapters into one code. So it's more of a one-stop shop. And people aren't flipping through multiple different chapters which when that happens, it's a lot easier when you make changes to create inconsistencies and errors down the road that you don't catch right away. So one of the first things we did is we went through the comprehensive plan. So since that is our foundation, we needed to start there, and we plowed through that, worked with the project advisory committee, fleshed out all the zoning related aspects, code related aspects. And those, even though they may not be directly related to zoning, there are some regulatory implications. And the overriding theme of the city's plan is the 15-minute neighborhood. What that means is being able to walk out of your house or your apartment, ride your bike, walk, and get to either a commercial center that might just be your local neighborhood corner store, or a service area, or offices. Obviously, you're not going to be able to get to work, everybody within 15 minutes and on foot. But that's the idea, is to try to create that 15-minute neighborhood concept. And it turns out, if you took a look at the watershed maps in the other room, you kind of get an idea of like, boy, you're within 15 minutes of a lot of commercial areas within the city. So the city already is fairly close to being walkable to a variety of different commercial designations. So our goal is to see where the gaps might be, and then make sure that this walkability is maintained. And that's both through proper locations of uses, and then the city's continued improvements to the sidewalks and the bicycle routes and the other accessibility aspects of it. So that's important for us to keep in mind, and that's really an overarching goal that our whole team is focused on. Highlighting the waterfront, like I said, the city's wrapping up their local waterfront plan, which opens up and maintains a steady stream of funds to improve parks and other recreational aspects. Better integrate the recreational resources. So as projects are proposed in certain locations, making sure that the planning board, the zoning board, the applicants understand if there's an opportunity to make a connection to a recreational resource, let's look at that, figure out a way we can coordinate that through the planning process where it's equitable and fair. The comprehensive plan also identified a series of priority areas, and the plan strongly encourages the city to identify ways to strengthen those areas. So you have a couple of your legacy regional commercial centers like Skyway Plaza and Plattsburgh Plaza. A lot of parking, underutilized. Obviously Skyway, when the base closed, that had a significant impact. Having gone to school here and lived here, I've seen how Skyway has transformed over the years, and it's doing what it can to make it in the very fast changing economy. But maybe there's other opportunities that the code can provide for the property owners to do some infill, consider additional uses, etc. So we're going to be looking at all of these locations and then some to try to figure out what's holding back development of the current zoning, and how can we change the zoning and modify that to help spur development that is reasonable and consistent with the comprehensive plan. Obviously, natural resources are critically important, and the LWRP, the local waterfront plan, has focused a lot on that. And then historic resources. The city has multiple historic districts, multiple properties on the historic register, and that a lot of what we've heard from the project advisory committee and other conversations we've had with stakeholders is that sometimes that process can be cumbersome. A lot is spent on making just the minor modifications to properties in historic districts that are on the register. So we'll look at ways to make that more predictable, provide some design guidelines, but also look at opportunities to maybe pull some of those reviews off the planning board's responsibility and provide it to the staff and have those be conducted in-house. So that's something we're going to look at, but with a still overall goal of maintaining those historic districts. They're not going to go away. We want to encourage the investment in those, but the investment needs to come with an understanding that the review process cannot be overly cumbersome. Connecting our assets. So the city, like I said, has been doing a fantastic job in improving their bike and pedestrian infrastructure. And this map is in the other one as well, and bike friendly. If you just go on the city's website, you can get an idea of all the work that has been done and that is in in the works and others that the city is looking for funding. So the zoning goal would be to make sure that we understand where these connectivity resources are, and that's also baked into the code. So as projects come before the boards, they recognize that here are the pedestrian and bicycle resources that exist. In 2 years, we're going to have these resources. Let's take those into consideration. Whereas under the current code, there's nothing that requires the planning and zoning boards to look that far ahead and discuss with the applicants on how they might be able to connect in with those. The other aspect from the comprehensive plan it's a term called complete streets. So in an urban environment, you have most of your built environment in streets. Obviously, the Market Street, you're redoing that, and you're ensuring that it continues to be available for bicycles, pedestrians, and automobiles. The goal of the complete streets is when projects come up, whether they're putting in new streets, rebuilding, or they're renovating existing street right-of-ways, is that those projects take into consideration not only the vehicles, but also the pedestrians and the bicyclists. And for the bicyclists, we don't necessarily mean a bike lane, but maybe a bike rack or some other facilities that would help encourage more people to ride their bikes and be able to safely lock them up and go to a restaurant or something along those lines. So providing those opportunities, not necessarily requirements in the code, is an important part of implementing the complete streets component. We'll use a mouse, something like that. They have died. I'll click at you. So there's obviously a variety of additional plans that we looked at. It wasn't just a comprehensive plan of the local waterfront plan, the city beach implementation plan, the Harborside plan, the downtown revitalization initiative, and then the housing study. And the housing study I'll focus on right now. So that was an important project, an important report for the city to take on. And the key recommendations that came out of that report was to consider adopting inclusionary zoning requirements, meaning that when, one example would be if you're proposing a certain number of units, that percentage of those would have to be available for low to median income residents. Also opportunities to provide density bonuses as a way to incentivize providing housing at a lower price point. Reducing or eliminating off-street parking, that obviously can get people very excited or very upset, and we know that there has to be a happy medium when it comes to parking, and that's something we're looking into. And then accessory dwelling units, you may have heard those, which are essentially apartments. Back in the day when it would be not uncommon to have an apartment over a garage or an in-law apartment in the basement, they are now becoming an important part of trying to add more housing to a community's housing stock. So right now, the code only allows accessory dwelling units in one zoning district, and very limited, very strict. And one of our goals is to look at ways to try to expand upon that, but also recognize that the character of the neighborhoods need to be respected. And that can happen, both can happen, if the code is written correctly and has the correct procedures in place. So other elements such as permitting more than one principal structure per lot. So this is an important part for commercial uses. So if somebody has a 5-acre lot and they put one commercial building on it, technically that's all they get, which is a very inefficient use of that land if they choose not to subdivide. So looking at ways to encourage additional density and uses on lots is an important part of this process as well as the missing middle income housing, which we had already talked about. So we've spoken with a lot of stakeholders to date, including this afternoon with a handful of business owners. All of these individuals that we spoke to, we continue to maintain contact with, and we will continue to work with them as we start to dig into specific issues that relate to them more specifically. Tomorrow, we're going to talk with a few bike and pedestrian advocates, and then we have a few more groups that we want to meet with: minority advocacy groups, arts and culture, and religious organizations. So we've been able to get a lot of great information from these individuals so far, and we'll keep going with them. So that was the kind of the foundation that's guiding us in terms of the comprehensive plan and the other plans that are out there. But we also did a deep dive into the existing zoning law, which is important, even though if you read the comprehensive plan, if you interpret that, it feels like we should just throw the zoning code out. And I know that there's some individuals here that agree with that. And ultimately that might be what happens, but we have to at least start and go through the existing zoning and subdivision laws to find out what's going on. Why are these issues happening in different locations? Because we're not necessarily going to throw it out completely. There's language, there's certain purpose and intents in zoning districts that we may keep and modify, but we do have to kind of go through. So our process is we go through the current one, what's called the diagnostic evaluation. Real snoozer, I know if you read it, that document is available online, and if you're interested, you can skip everything and go right to the end of the matrix, and that goes through the entire code and explains the issues and gaps in the code, and that's our starting point to make those changes. So after we find out what the issues are, we dig into what's happening on the ground, and we look to calibrate the code or the new code to implement the comprehensive plan and the other aspects that the city would like to focus on, and then we codify, which is another fancy term for writing the zoning ordinance. So when we did the diagnostic evaluation, we used the comprehensive plan as a guide, but there's three basic principles when it comes to this. So zoning should respect the existing use, but also reflect the desired pattern going forward. The built environment isn't necessarily static. We do have historic structures that we want to maintain, but there are parts of the city that need to be revitalized, and infill development needs to happen. Underutilized sites need to be brought back up and put back on the tax rolls. Zoning should really regulate only what needs to be regulated, and we found through the code there's a lot of issues that, frankly, really are no longer an issue that needs to be addressed. And that, number three, it needs to be, it needs to implement the plan and not be a barrier to the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan was used to help score the existing code, the subdivision, the zoning. And again, that's what's in the matrices. But we do get into a lot of detail throughout that report if you're interested in the specifics. And we use these high-level categories: accessibility, housing, natural resources, historic resources, and economic development, and went through every section of the code to see, what parts might be getting in the way of increasing housing opportunities, accessibility, what might be complicating historic preservation, and what might be inhibiting economic growth. So those are the categories we use to go through the code. So there's the matrix. There's several pages of those. It's not up here intended for you to read because I'm breaking all the rules of PowerPoint, and it's probably a 2 font, so you're not going to see anything. And we did it for the code, all the code sections, and then for the different zoning districts that are within the code. And there is a zoning district map in the other room there. If you're not familiar with it, it breaks down the entire city by districts, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So the administrative component, we looked at every aspect of the process, and one of them are the variances. So if you can't meet the front yard setback, you want to put a deck on, or an extension, for whatever reason, you can come and seek an area variance. Or if you want to propose a use that's not allowed in the zoning district, you get a use variance. And we found that the majority of the variances that were coming before the ZBA were pretty simple, no-brainer, okay, yep, that makes sense. But the process requires public hearings, at least one, if not 2 meetings, time, investment, zoning board staff, or zoning board time, etc. So we may look to lighten their load, move some of those to an administrative review based upon perhaps the percentage of relief they're looking for the setback. And then most of the variances that were denied were use variances. And from a land use law perspective, use variance applications should be denied because it's a very strong tests that you have to meet in order to be legally issued the use variance. Not to say that communities all throughout New York kind of have their own rules, and I've worked in some and felt like you probably shouldn't do this, but that's your choice. If most of these that are being denied are use variances, maybe we need to go look and see what those are. What zoning district are they being proposed in? Are they being denied just because it's not allowed? Maybe we need to consider modifying the uses there. So that kind of struck us as something that we need to take a look at. And under site plan review, with respect to increasing access to housing, we just found it interesting that the criteria for approving 2 and 3 family homes was significantly more strict than others, which on one side you can kind of understand that. But as you move forward and realize the housing situation that a lot of communities are in, maybe we can do the same, provide the same benefit as that process is right now, but through a different approach and still get a positive outcome. So that was one that we called out for consideration. Here's the zoning district map. There's one in the other room too, just different colors, that breaks the city down into residential, mixed use, commercial district, industrial districts. And one of the next major things we're going to start on now is start to dig into each of these zoning districts. Get a much better understanding of what's in there right now, what types of uses, what's the density, what are the boundaries, do the boundaries need to be adjusted, uses need to be addressed, does the density need to be evaluated. So we know right off the bat that is the first thing that we're going to have to tackle because that really sets the stage from the ground level up in terms of the regulations that may apply to each of these areas that we may modify. And then we went through each of the zoning districts. So your R1 is your lowest density residential, single family allowed only, 2 family, 3 family, some public uses, parks and rec, low impact type uses. That accounts for 23% of the city's zone land. We combine that with the RH Historic District, which is essentially around Brinkerhoff and Court Street area, a lot of the student neighborhoods. You add those together, that's 26% of the city's land area that's zoned is only for single family dwelling. I think that was an interesting number. Some may feel that that's fine. Others may feel that that's inhibiting the expansion of compatible residential uses going forward. And then the R2, general residential, which allows for commercial and residential and higher density. The high-rise development parameters, and high-rise, it's a misnomer. We're talking 5 stories here. But the way to calculate that density in the current code is extremely confusing. And we were talking about it today during our business stakeholder meeting. And one of them, who is an engineer, said, it's very hard to figure out. And I asked 3 engineers at my office, and I got 3 different answers on a development proposal in terms of the density. And so the formulas that are in there are very difficult to implement. And that was one of the first things the PAC said, yep, that's gone. We'll make that executive decision. We'll start fresh on that. And then the remainder of the community is broken down into business districts and industrial and the recreation. The recreation, the RC districts are essentially make up the old base and then the small part of the new base that's within the city that allows for a variety of recreation and residential commercial uses. So the B1 and B2, so B1, these commercial districts are Plattsburgh Plaza, Skyway Plaza, and then the Miller Street, Reed Street corridors. Those are your B1 and B2. Generally, very small percentage of the overall land area. The uses and the density in B1 and B2 are almost identical. In fact, they're on the same page of the use table. So that's something that we'll have to take a look at. Maybe there's opportunities to combine those. The central business district, which is downtown where we are right now, only 1%. And this is where you have the higher density in terms of not only the number of uses, but the land area covered in terms of You have basically 0 line setbacks, and the structures are up to the back of the sidewalk, and on the sides and the back to maximize, and that's what you want in your downtown area. You want to be able to maximize your footprints. The industrial area, we had one individual today who owns an industrial business in the city, and we talked about opportunities to maybe increase the flexibility of uses. The code already provides some flexibility, but we're looking at ways to consider maybe areas transitioning, not necessarily getting rid of industrial, but just the different understanding of what industrial is. Industry was one of the reasons why zoning was ever originally created, is to separate the industries from the homes, because there was, back then, you didn't have all of the health regulations and requirements to ensure that stuff happened from a public safety perspective. Now the uses you see primarily in the industrial districts aren't necessarily caustic or processing raw materials. They're a little bit less impacted on the surrounding properties. So we want to look at ways to provide other opportunities for these property owners to continue to invest and expand their operations and not be limited because it's a historical termed industrial district. Then we start to get into the lot yards and structure requirements. The one thing that stuck out to us is, regardless of how large your property is, the max number of units is 24. Now, maybe that is reasonable for the majority of available lots, but that is clearly an arbitrary number that was put out there. We don't, nobody is still around, at least that we know, that came up with that number. So we're going to look at that, and really, as we toss out the current density calculation schedule that I mentioned earlier, we'll look at different approaches that the city can use to calculate residential density. Also, there's very strict restrictions on accessory dwelling units. In fact, they're only allowed in the RH district, which is the fairly strict single-family residential district. Planned unit developments, the size threshold is 5 acres, so a planned unit development allows a landowner to propose uses of density that is not allowed under the underlying zoning, and they go through a rezoning process that is legal, as opposed to just changing the zoning, what's called spot zoning. We think maybe, even though 5 acres is pretty low, maybe there's opportunities to modify that even more to incentivize infill developments in smaller lots, allow people to come in and propose something that's not necessarily allowed by density or use, and then let the process move forward. However, if we do a great job, you may not even need to use PUDs anymore, because the code would be flexible enough to allow those opportunities to happen. And also, the PUD process doesn't involve any bonuses, which that is really contrary to the whole PUD process. A lot of the times, communities use that to incentivize, listen, we'll give you 5 more units if you include a park or provide some investment in the area of your project, and it's a negotiation, and everybody wins. And then parking, as I mentioned, a lot of issues with that, but we will take a deep dive into that current schedule and look for ways to improve that. So the last part of this, I just want to talk a little bit about the initial zoning district analysis that we've been working on. So zoning district on the right, the breakdown of total land area by district on the left. R1 and R2, those are your primary residential areas in terms of land area. R2, 42%. That's the dark red. You can see that is the vast majority of the city's zoning. And that allows for all kinds of residential uses and commercial uses. And that's great. That is an important aspect to have. It does obviously cover all of SUNY. So there is, you have to take that into consideration. That does kind of skew the numbers a bit. And then R1, which is that would be salmon color from here. That's your single family residential district. That covers a pretty significant area of the city. And then the third largest area by percentage is industrial at 12%, and that's the pea green that you see in the south, east, and north of the city. And then in terms of breakdown by average lot size, the commercial, which we have right now, we're in right now, obviously that's not surprising, but that has the smallest lot size, and that's what you want. You want to maximize lot coverage, smaller lots, higher density. This is where you want to pack in your higher density. RH, which is in the purple there. Let's see if this works right here. Again, and then the two hash outlines, those are your Court Street and Brinkerhoff historic districts. And that zoning district is residential historic. And that clearly was zoned for the reason because of those historic districts that are on there, and then a couple of outlying properties that are on the register, not necessarily within those districts. That is your second smallest average lot size. So that's really where a lot of density is between downtown and your RH districts, which should be surprised because the RH district is supposed to be single family only, but you'll see in a minute how that clearly is not the case through whatever means that may have happened in the past. But the city has some clear core density areas. So north of Cornelia, the Sandra Cogan, Trombley Ave neighborhoods, and then the lower South Catherine neighborhoods. There we go. Those are your core residential locations in the city. Additional core areas on the old base, Brew Street, US Oval, and then the Lake Country Village neighborhoods, which are relatively new. So it's great that you're seeing this new residential development and creating some good clusters of density in otherwise previously underutilized parts of the city. And then residential uses by zoning district. So here's where we took a breakdown of what's actually out there. So this, again, this is a misnomer. So this is the commercial, your downtown area here. And all this data is based upon real property data we get from the county. And it's based upon how the assessor classifies each property. So all of these multi-story mixed-use structures, they're typically just referred to as row houses or commercial structures. The assessor does not recognize when there's apartments in there. But we know that the vast majority of these have apartments on the upper floor. Some of them are vacant and need to be renovated. But I just wanted to show you that, in case you ever see that number in the future, that is not an accurate representation of the density that's down here. That's just based upon the data that we have. And then we have the R2 district, which is the largest area, or the one with the most single-family residential. So that's the top line here. So 1,454 single-family residential lots in there, and then you go down to 2-family, 3-family, and again, R2, you are allowed to have single-family, 2-family, 3 in apartments. So that makes sense from an existing development perspective. R1, single-family only, slightly less single-family units in it. These generally are bigger lots, so you're not going to get the same density, but you do see just under 62-family, handful of 3, and some apartments. And multiple residences are means that there's more than one residential structure on the lot. Those are all likely pre-existing, predates the zoning. Old carriage houses that have been converted to farms or garages. But they're listed as separately listed as multiple residences. And then RH, again, this is the residential historic district, and you have more apartments than you have single family. And that number, when we saw that, was pretty alarming to kind of understand, like, okay, maybe the zoning clearly is not jiving with what's out there. You have apartments, you have 2 families, 3 families that are there, not likely going away. How do we address that? How do we allow situations where a structure is damaged or they want to make some renovations, and that because apartments or 2-family or 3-family are not allowed, slows the process down, increases the cost? How can we modify this to still respect the historic part and parts of that neighborhood, and the single family aspect of the neighborhood, but to understand that the existing land use right now is going to drive to a certain extent what happens down the road, and we want to be able to come to the middle and identify a reasonable approach forward to allow this to continue within reasons. So then we took a look at the residential districts from a visual standpoint. Up top here, purple, that's single family, so we see all those throughout. And again, we have two maps out there. We have a full land use map that has all the land uses, and then we have a residential map that kind of gives you a real understanding of where the different residential uses are throughout the city. So this is the RH district. Here are the two historic districts, and then everything that's in blue, those are all apartments. Clearly, you're right on the border with SUNY, makes sense. So this is something that we have to take into consideration when we're looking at the future zoning changes and recognizing the importance of those historic districts. And then I just wanted to give you a breakdown again, just a larger map here to see kind of where all your core single family areas are, with a great kind of healthy mix of 2, 3, and multifamily residences throughout those neighborhoods. And then we head south. You got another section along South Catherine Street, and then you get across the river. You have another great section of residential, a good mix. And then down in the very southeastern part of the city as well. And then I'll just close with a couple of maps that show the walk shed, and we have all of the walk sheds out there. We do walk sheds from these key commercial intersections, or key commercial nodes rather, and then we did walk sheds for all of the schools. And what that does is we tell the computer, the geographic information system, to identify how far out you can go and still be able to walk within 15 minutes from a particular location. So we put that star, I think, right outside City Hall, or actually no, that's up outside of Monopole. Monopole bar. You went to school here. I figured that was a good destination. So that shows how far you can walk and still be able to get here within 15 minutes, give or take, obviously. So the computer recognizes the street patterns and creates a map of how far you can get out from that one location. So this is an important part of us understanding the existing walkability and how close commercial nodes are from the key residential areas, and where, again, we might want to make some adjustments. So then we looked at the Margaret Miller Street. We got a nice little concentration of pizza place, comic book place, a couple of corner stores, restaurants, and just once you get a look at that, you kind of realize, wow, it is pretty walkable. You can get around the city in a pretty short amount of time, and then of course faster on bike. So, and then we also did one from Boynton Ave, where there is a small little retail plaza there, and a large section of the city's residential in that area. So we're using these again to help guide us in understanding how certain land use designations may change or should change to continue to facilitate these commercial nodes within core neighborhoods, as well as the regional ones. We did them, and they're out there in the other room. Call them Skyway, Plattsburgh Plaza. Even those are historically automobile oriented shopping centers. Oh, and then we did have a one. I forgot we included that. So that's Skyway Plaza. So that shows the reach, particularly with the new residential development that's happened here. It's key that that's still within 15 minutes. And even if generally not everybody that's living there is going to walk, but it's a very short vehicle trips, and meaning that you're able to get at least some of your basic needs within a very short trip and not have to drive necessarily all the way up to Moneylake Street. So our next steps. So don't worry, we have more volumes of the report, so you can dig through in the future. But the next thing, like we said, we're going to dig into the land use districts, start analyzing those, using the walk sheds to help us look at filling in the gaps. We're updating the housing report to get as much updated statistics on affordability of the housing within the city. So that'll be updated in that volume as well. And then we'll have, I suspect that we'll have completed all our initial stakeholder meetings and summarize all those results as well, which are going to be very important part of informing the next steps. And then we'll jump into the final volume, which really sets the direction for the zoning update. So we start to dig into the actual zoning districts, and possible adjustments to density and uses, best practices analysis. So what that means is when there are particular possible solutions, like say form-based code or different takes on residential density. You know, our job is to go and, based on our experience, but also other communities, find out how these have worked or not worked. What lessons have they learned, so that can inform this process. So we're not necessarily doing it at the first time. You know, we want to be able to, we're taking this amount of time to update the code. We want to base it on some real life situations and how other communities have attempted to solve these solutions. Then the proposed regulatory approach, which means that we'll start to draft the actual language, and it starts to become more real and an understanding of what the solutions might be. And then the format of the code, which is less important to most people. That's just how we're going to organize the entire code. But all through these, there will continue to be public sessions and input. More informative documents will be out there that you guys can take a look at and provide your input. And again, we'll have future workshops. So through November through January, the November one might be more online focus because unfortunately, just the way the timing is now, we're getting into a variety of holiday seasons and time off from school. So we have to respect that and be able to hold these during times when we can try to maximize the turnout here. So we'll start to dig into all of these issues, which are great working sessions. We'll have the large maps out. We'll have ideas already sketched out, and we'll be looking for input from the public on our next steps. So thank you for listening, allowing us to get through this. Thank you for coming out. We do want to provide time for questions and answers. You know, the city has not made a decision at all on any particular zoning change yet. We're still listening. And there is a flyer, I think it's under the sign-in sheet there, but there's a QR code for those that are QR inclined. You can scan that and go right to the project website. And the mayor had mentioned the website that you might have been following, the road work here, that's the same one. And on that, you'll be able to access a public map viewer, and it also has a series of questions similar to what we have on the boards out there. But you're able to go in and look at all the different land uses in the city, turn on and off the different ones, look at all the walk sheds, all of the property information is publicly available because that's public information. So if you're interested in who owns what zoning district they're in, this is a tool that we created to help our team, but also allow the public to get a better understanding of what's going on in their neighborhood. So please get online, take a look at that. It works better on the laptop. We're trying to format it so it works just as good on your phone, because I know a lot of people don't even have desktops or laptops. So bear with us on that, but you can still navigate around on your phone and take a look at the different locations. So I appreciate that. And I guess we'll open it up for questions and conversation. Yes.
Matt, I'm concerned about, I keep hearing flexibility. Where's the protection for residential areas whose deeds say that they cannot have that happen? Are you just going to eliminate that protection?
Well,
can you do that?
No. So
at the expense of compromising neighborhoods.
Right. So if there's hypothetically, if an entire neighborhood is under if an entire neighborhood is under, say, a deed restriction or a covenant for a particular use, certainly that might be something the municipality takes into account. But if there's a couple of properties scattered throughout a district that says you can only have a single family dwelling, the overlying zoning if the city decides to change it from single family to two family, that won't impact that property unless and until that covenant is released. But the city, municipalities do not enforce private covenants or easements that are on a piece of property. Now, if somebody comes before the board and seeks approval for a project, that's a little bit different, and that's a case by case where the planning board, zoning board would have to take into consideration, you know, do we even bother going through this process when we know your homeowners association doesn't allow it? So there's not an easy answer to that. But the overall issue of impact to neighborhoods with increasing density, you know, we recognize that that is going to be an important thing for the city to get correct. And that's why we're just starting this process, and we're going to go from zoning district to zoning district to neighborhood to
Well,
neighborhood.
I just hope they're protected. You know, up on Colgan Avenue, they've got such beautiful homes up there. And we were told that they could build an apartment house up there. Now, I don't know if it can go 15 stories, if that's the limit with the college or what, but these neighborhoods should be protected.
Yeah, the
and I
college
hope that they will be.
Yeah, SUNY operates under different regulations.
And the other day recently, there was an article in the paper about, you know, a bar here, a bar there, how it develops, you know, neighborhood friendliness and all that. Some of these residential areas are 15 minutes from a school. And is there going to be a commercial property like that allowed in that area if it's that close to a school?
I think it's a proximity of the school to a general commercial area. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, it's in the city. Again, if you look at the watershed maps, I'd say most commercial areas are already within 15 minutes of every school. Mm-hmm. Most large, dense residential neighborhoods are already within 15 minutes of schools. So we're not necessarily saying that we have to fix that. I think that that's what we want to maintain. And then if there are other gaps to commercial centers from neighborhoods or schools from residential neighborhoods, because the city is a walking school district, it's important to be able to maintain that walkability. So, you know, what you're talking about now is a little bit hypothetical, and then over the next several months, you know, we'll be able to focus in on areas that might be of specific concern to people, and then we can have those conversations then.
Thank you for your time, man.
You're welcome.
Matt, I'm sorry. Just for the people online, it's hard to pick up the audience. If you just repeat the question before you.
Sure.
Thank you.
I don't know if I'm misunderstanding or not, but is it, as far in concerns with housing, is it basically saying that anybody can take your garage and turn it into an apartment?
So the question was, are we advocating that being able to turn any garage into a residential use? Mm-hmm. I'll say that the city and the project advisory committee hasn't made a decision other than throwing out the density calculation schedule. We haven't made a decision on anything yet. The comprehensive plan and the housing study did specifically state that any way you can do to increase access to housing, we should do within reason. In allowing accessory dwelling units in a variety of zoning districts. And whether that's in all zoning districts or just a couple, that decision hasn't been made. But that is certainly, if you read the comprehensive plan, it's certainly inferred in there that we need to take a better look at allowing that. Because again, right now, the only zoning district where true accessory dwelling units are allowed is an RH, which is one of your most restricted residential districts, which only allows for single family homes. And you have to get a special use permit, which is not an easy undertaking. So that is clearly what we would consider a barrier to providing more housing. And that is also a way to allow for additional housing in perhaps historically single family neighborhoods without necessarily going to apartments, which can increase the density to a point where then it changes the character of the neighborhood, as opposed to allowing property owners to put in, whether it's an attached accessory dwelling unit, which nobody would be the wiser of if that's there, but again, through permitted process, not done without a permit, but going through whatever process the city decides, and in some cases, some communities will allow for attached accessory dwelling units in some neighborhoods, but won't allow for detached ones because that could create potentially more impacts on the neighbors. And again, it depends on the district, how big the lots are, et cetera. So that's everything that we're going to look through. We're going to look at all the different types of accessory dwelling units, which ones should go in which districts, what the review process is, and what protections are in place, ensuring that where access is, what they look like, where they're located. So that's all going to go into this process. None of these decisions are going to be made as a black and white.
Good to know. That's
Okay.
good to know.
Thank you.
And
Yes.
I apologize if I missed it. When you were talking to the different stakeholder groups that you were talking to, were seniors,
Seniors, they were in the house.
We haven't gotten to
We
that
haven't gotten to
stage.
them yet. I know we were going to lump them into as we were trying to. We were meeting with a lot of individuals, but I know that's on the list. Just may not have gotten onto that list.
just because I think there are some very unique needs in terms of that middle housing that you were talking about for seniors. And I also think that often, my perception at least, is that once you've retired and you're living on a more fixed income, you might be staying in your big house
Right.
because you can't afford to go anyplace else. And there's all kinds of issues that come along with that when you're living in that big house, because it's really no longer appropriate for you, but you don't have another viable option. If you have a viable option, you'd also free up your big house for somebody who needs a big house.
That is exactly correct. Yes. And thank you for reminding us of that. That's an important thing, and we'll go back and make sure that we have that on the list. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes. Gary?
I spoke with the outside man, but I thought it was communicated to the public here, so it's out there. I own a building on City Hall Place here, one of the multi-story apartment complex with a commercial on the first floor. I want to bring to attention, just so if anybody else has any opposition about it, we're in the process of renovating the building, renovating all the apartments. And we believe in downtown, believe in acquiring more properties to renovate. But the problem we're running into is a dated provision, I believe, in the Central Business District, which states that all apartments are only allowed above the first floor, which I understand the intentionality of that, which was to preserve commercial spaces on the street level, which I totally stand behind. The problem with that one language is that it prohibits apartments in the basement level, which a lot of these buildings are 100+ years old, and they have basement with separate access that are not even street levels, and the back of the property has no visibility to any pedestrians. But because of that law, we're not able to increase, the housing like what you guys want in downtown, which is more housing. And I would like to put more housing there, but the law prohibits that. So I'd like to finish on this unfinished basement. There's actually 2 units in our building that are unfinished basement that we can convert. And we are actually looking at a couple other properties to acquire, and they have a similar issue. A lot of these buildings have a basement that are unfinished. A lot of people haven't renovated these properties in a long time. So that's what I would like to do, but the law, the zoning prohibits that. I'm hoping that you guys see that, because it hits all your markers of what you guys want to do, to increase housing, and increase, the density, and I want to affect at all the integrity or character of the neighborhood at all, because it's not affecting commercial spaces.
Okay, thank you. So just for those at home, the comment was ensuring that the city looks at situations where residential might be appropriate in the basement sublevel, because the current zoning regulations state that residential is in the commercial districts in general, residential is only allowed on the upper floors. And your situation is a little unique, and thank you for bringing that to our attention, and we'll certainly work on that. There's been other requests in the city, not necessarily related to, this is a true first floor, but not in downtown, but these units are generally underutilized, and they're looking for more flexibility. So again, we haven't made any decisions, the city hasn't made any decisions, but that is certainly something that we want to look at, and look at other communities that may have allowed this, and what they've run into and how they've addressed certain issues. So Because residential first floor in your main commercial area, mixed use commercial definitely is not appropriate. Clearly, in a lot of urban areas in the United States, throughout the world, you got residential on the first floor, but they're not necessarily commercial districts. So here we're talking about taking what might be not your situation, but just as an example, an existing storefront and allowing residential. That's not an efficient use of the community's very limited commercial space, but your situation is certainly unique, and we'll take that back to the group and take that into consideration. Yes.
Are you familiar with the New York State's disadvantaged communities criteria?
Yes.
And that there's a census tract of the city?
Yep. Yes.
Because I think that would be really interesting to look at which zoning regulations are there. And I don't know if you know, there's a spreadsheet where you can go through and actually see why that census tract was 10 as it wasn't for all the categories. And I think that would be something interesting to overlay with whatever zoning, especially having to do housing, like different level units you choose to allow there.
Very good point. So that the comment was make sure that we take a look at the census tract data, which breaks those areas down by household income and disadvantaged populations, to make sure that the zoning in those situations maybe allow for more higher density and theoretically lower cost housing, as well as if the city does look at inclusionary housing requirements, that's certainly a guide to use. So thank you. Very good point, suggestion. Yes, Rebecca.
I'm just trying to figure out how the increase in density might impact green space.
Green space?
Green space.
So the question is how increased density would impact green space. So, I mean, there's a lot of issues that come into play. The city's goal isn't to take existing green space and convert it to housing necessarily. There's a lot of infill areas. There's a lot of structures that are sitting vacant, you know, are being demolished through neglect. And there's reasons why that, because perhaps the zoning won't allow what it is trying to do, money doesn't make sense, etc. So the priority for the city is to go and look and rezone areas that are greenfields in particular. You don't have a lot of open vacant land. There's a handful of large lots, but as one of the first meetings we've had, and then the comprehensive plan did identify some areas in the city, particularly on Boynton Avenue, very large vacant areas, but recognize that, like, okay, maybe down the road we should focus on that. But right now, we know that in the area where it's closer to resources, existing parks, commercial centers, schools, you know, let's focus our density there and work on making those changes. At the same time, the review process needs to take into consideration how many more individuals might be living in an area and what are the recreational resources that they can reach. And that's where the other many hats that the planning department and the recreation department wears is ensuring that enough recreational resources are available to the city. And that you're constantly looking at that. Is there enough within different parts of the city for families to use? And if a larger development comes in an area that could support providing green space and recreation space, then that could be something that's worked into the code. Actually, the code already has it through the subdivision regulations, but that's separate. But there could be opportunities to, again, through a negotiation process, of like, okay, you'll get X number of units, but you know, you're really going to need some green space and recreational space that is either on your property or through a negotiated process that they contribute funds towards the city's recreational account to maintain or increase those resources. So then there's the issue of just pervious property versus impervious. Obviously, as storms continue to get a little crazier and more rain comes down than you would ever expect, you know, we need to balance the fact that we want to have high density in the city, and that a lot of the time means that that water is going to run off. So looking at alternative ways, such as what's called green infrastructure, that's not a new topic, but ways in which to try to maintain that water on site. There was a discussion today in our business meeting of, if somebody has a planted roof, a green roof, can that account for impervious or percentage of impervious space if we allow them to maximize the rest of their lot? And I thought that was a great idea, not a simple yes or no answer. But that just goes to show that there's a variety of creative ways out there that we can ensure that there's enough recreation space, but also that the entire city isn't paved. We got to maintain a lot of permeability. We'll go here first. Yes.
I was going to say, you might want to look at the New York State Office of the Aging, their master plan. They've been enrolling it in different counties, and it goes along a lot with what you're saying, the mixed use, the 15-minute accessibility. The whole idea is to keep elderly and senior citizens in their homes.
Right. And
the way to do it is having that accessibility of services and structures and all that. So you might want to, connect a little bit with that too, and see what they're saying and bring that into your plan.
Great. Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with it, but we'll take a look at it again, especially when we coordinate a meeting with the senior population. But yeah, they recognize the benefits of these new, and some of them aren't new. They're just kind of, people are recognizing that these different development techniques have been around a while, and maybe we need to get them into the mainstream and try to find ways to streamline those approvals. So thank you. It's good.
I just want to pay a little attention to the code enforcement side of these things, especially when we think about converting basins or garages. And you mentioned the flooding potentially, a family in New York City that was flooded out recently.
Yep.
And I just feel we are not equipped for that now. We've been in a bit of a rainbow effect up here. But as we convert some of our space, safety is primary, as well as access to the fire departments and all those things, the density has consequences for them.
Absolutely, yeah, and we do have a code enforcement division on our project advisory committee, and that we recognize that as, particularly the housing in the basement. That was the first thing that I remember. It was last summer. It was last summer where and also the storms just recently. I don't think that it got as much press in terms of people getting flooded out, but it certainly, I'm sure it was quite awful. So that needs to be taken into consideration. That's a building code thing, but that doesn't mean we're going to ignore it. And that's why we have the code staff working with us to take that into consideration. In any way that we could help modify those requirements, we will. The state's constantly updating the uniform residential and energy code every year. It takes a little bit more step towards more sustainability, and I certainly think that we will, to the best that we can, because the building codes are the building codes, but recognize that, and then any planning review process before a board, most of the time you kind of have to have an open dialogue with your police and fire and emergency services to ensure that if a new development's going in, that they provide the access. And I know the planning board and the zoning board does that. The idea here is to just bake that into the code, so that's just an automatic referral for certain projects to ensure that the fire departments review the project, they concur or they provide their recommendations, and then issues such as apartments in the basement. Obviously, it's just a building code issue in and of itself, and that planning board doesn't deal with that. Code enforcement division will deal with that.
And do we need, I don't know what the funding is for that, but it seems like we need to beef those areas up.
Right. And as we go through, and we talked a lot about, oh, we can do all these administrative stuff. We can get Shalise and Alicia, but there's only 2 people there, and if we're increasing that, we have to be cognizant of that. We can't have, what they call the unfunded mandates, right? That, it seems great for us and it becomes somebody else's problem. So when we make these recommendations, we'll have to have these difficult conversations of what's the budget? What will it be in the future? Will you be able to effectively administer this? And then the building department too, the number of code enforcement officers, You know, we've been having a lot of discussions about property maintenance and the issues with landlords and property conditions. And we've just kind of scratched that surface because some of it gets a little bit beyond zoning, but all of this is connected. So it's certainly something we're not going to ignore.
So if I could tag on to that, if it goes beyond zoning, how do we guarantee that in the future there will be enough code enforcement to enforce the code and to keep that going? Because I think that is really the problem that we've seen in the past. There's been lack of, you know, the budget issues, and so we may be all in favor today of increasing code enforcement resources. But then 5 years from now, the budget's a little tighter, we need to pull back on that and clean it up.
Yeah, you can see that the complexity of the situation, a lot of which is out of our hands right now. You know, as you know, we're working on the zoning. You know, we're not involved in day-to-day city finances, so we just unfortunately can't project what's going to happen under another administration, what economic issues may impact the region, and require those cuts. Our job is to get a system in place that can function regardless of who's on the boards, who sits in these seats, and to the best that we could, you know, with the economy, and we just kind of have to let the process play out, and sometimes just come to the meetings a lot and say, hey, don't forget, you know, you said you were going to have this number of code enforcement officers. So, but very good points, very good questions and concerns. Anybody else tonight? Yes, in the back.
Are the historic districts going to be potentially redrawn?
The historic districts themselves, no, that's outside of the purview of the city. So the Court Street, Brinkerhoff, Point Historic District, so those are on the National Register. So the boundaries of those districts are not going to change. They can expand, they can contract, and that's a personal decision of those property owners. That's not a decision of the city. What we've heard and need to figure out a way to do is to allow minor work on buildings that are in the district on the register to happen without a significant amount of review time, and also make it a little bit more predictable in terms of what's required. And like there was a conversation today about spending an entire meeting and discussing the color of the shingle. You know, is that the best use of the planning board's time? No, or anybody's time.
And down in the back,
yeah. So that's why.
Would Chippewa have to be involved?
That all depends on what the project is, if there's state or federal funding involved. So you know, and part of our process too is to try to better inform the landowners and the general public of what it means to be within a historic district and what you can and can't do. Because a lot of people feel if you're in a historic district, you can't do anything with your property, and that's not true. And it really depends on, a lot of it depends on if you're using state funding. You know, so usually if it's like a municipal project that you're using state funding, then you really have to, you know, you coordinate with state historic preservation. And there is a building down in the old base, and we talked to one of the property owners there, and they've been struggling to find a happy medium with the state because that building is on the register, and that's just one example of, you know, the issues. And at the end of the day, it comes down to cost. You know, how much is it going to cost to renovate these buildings, and does the math work from an investment standpoint? So, so the answer is no. We're not going to change the districts. They could change on their own, but the regulations in terms of the process it needs to change. To one, we want to keep protecting those districts, but they don't need to be overregulated if that's not required. Okay. Yes, sir.
I'm very much in favor of ADUs and also, you know, increasing density, allowing multiple families to live in, you know, what used to be single family housing. I have no problem with it whatsoever. What I do have a problem with is landlords who take advantage of that situation and end up creating these monstrosities and otherwise quite attractive neighborhoods. What can we do to increase density, but also improve quality?
Right, so the question is what, in addition to allowing increased density and maintaining properties in a reasonable manner, both from an aesthetic as well as a health and safety aspect for the tenants. So that's another thing that goes hand in hand with the building code, the ability of the code enforcement officers to be able to have the tools and the regulations in place to ensure that when there's a violation, that the landowner just doesn't sit on it. And because when it comes to property maintenance, if the laws aren't written well enough, communities' hands are tied. And a lot of times the community, these violations will just sit because nobody has, the municipality has to decide do they want to go to court and spend the money, and so what we want to do is, from a zoning perspective, make sure that the ability to provide reasonable housing throughout the city is there. But the housing report also recognized that, and I think that was one of the instances that the city now has a rental registry that's been around for a little bit. I think there's been some tweaks to that because of the housing report, but there was also other recommendations in there about ensuring that the violation review process is as tight as possible so that the city can pursue these habitual violators, because it's clearly a health and safety issue, and it's also impacting accessibility to housing. So, that's not something that we can completely do through zoning, but again, that's why we're working with the other departments to make sure that as best we can, these are happening currently. Okay, great, thank you. Great, thank you. Sir.
So the minutes of your meetings, are they available?
Yes, the first few, I think 2 or 3 our PAC meeting minutes are available on our Google Drive, but we will make sure that they've been approved before they're released to the public. So the first several meetings, a lot of it was just kind of going through the existing zoning and the comprehensive plan. We had, like I said, no decisions in terms of what zoning changes are going to happen made yet, but certainly make sure that we do a better job of having those publicly available going forward. Knowing that now we're getting to the decision part of this project and people want to know what's happening, and certainly that's your public right to do that. So these are public, this is a public project.
So the whatever the regulations end up being, they would also adhere to the city as well.
The zoning?
Yeah.
Yes and no. So zoning law, case law, there's different aspects of what a municipality needs to comply with their own zoning. Well, not so much as that, it's just in terms of case law. So there are situations where a city has to do certain improvements or certain projects that they don't have to follow their own zoning. That gets pretty wonky. But for the most part, anytime any community has ever asked me, do we need to go through the planning board? I say, yeah, there really should be no reason for you to do that. But when it comes to public buildings and other situations like that, it's really driven by case law, and I would direct you to the land use attorney for the city, or the planning board. No, just kidding. But yeah, and that's just, there's no way to answer that without a specific, sample. That is, there is case law out there, and you can probably easily find that online in terms of there's some tests, and I can't remember what the test is, but it goes through, like, is the project for this, and this, and if you answer yes, then yes, you have to go through the zoning. But, every community kind of has their own way of going about it. But obviously, if the city's going to be spending all this time updating the code, clearly they have to enforce the code. That's first and foremost. So, but individual little projects, I can't speculate on that.
And the last thing is, assuming it's still exempt from city codes.
Generally, yes. Yeah, just like schools in general. Communities I work in, and when I was in the planning board and in my community, they've always been good. They would come before the board and say, this is what we're doing, recognizing that they could just not. and just do whatever they want.
It's still required to meet building codes.
Well, there's the New York State Building Code, but in terms of, yeah, that's why you have, you know, the 12-story residential towers, which you would not be able to do that anywhere else. But that's SUNY property, that's their regulations. But we did speak with SUNY, and we will maintain contact with them through this process. Not necessarily looking at what they're doing there on site, but looking at any improvements they make and how we can enhance that in terms of, say, pedestrian corridors, housing, commercial nodes, et cetera, and other opportunities perhaps where the college may want to, say, provide a meeting space down here, you know, renting facilities and just making sure that, you know, their ideas of try to provide other opportunities for students throughout the city that we can incorporate into the code, provided it makes sense from a land use perspective. Thank you. Yep. Yes, sir.
So we don't know the answer to this question, but for the benefit of those out in the audience, will there be general review and any provisions within the zoning ordinance of threshold timeline?
Through this process?
Through this process.
Right now, because I know the city is circulating drafts, which we did get, and I know we had a very brief conversation about that, and we'll continue that. I guess I personally, I wouldn't see how it plays out. You know, if the city decides to say, you know what, wrap it into the code updates, we'd rather it be looked at holistically, I'm sure we'll take it out. You know, that might be a better choice, just from a practical standpoint of if you decided where you do and do not allow short-term rentals, and we're looking at residential and commercial uses, and that maybe should be in the same conversation. You know, that, you know, if I had a choice, I'd say let's wrap it in. But I know that process kicked off on its own, and I think there was a meeting last week here on that. And I will have to defer to the city. If they say we want you guys to do that, and we'll do it. Okay. So it seems like it, at the very least, we should be involved before it's done, from my professional standpoint.
Second question.
Okay.
There was a lot of reference to parking standards in the review. I know in the past in the city there's been different proposals about eliminating parking.
Right.
Parking review and standards are anticipated as recommendations that are going to come out of this zoning proposal, the zoning changes.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, right now you have your typical parking schedule that is nothing more than completely arbitrary for the most part, probably copied from some other community 50 years ago, not that long ago. You know, in one section it talks about the number of adults, you know, which I get it, you know, an adult you're going to be driving, you know, but it's certainly outdated. We need to take a look at that. But that again, that's not something that we're just going to go through and just slash. We need to look at. It's going to be different for different parts of the city. But absolutely, that needs to be addressed. Some more flexibility, put in there some more opportunity for the applicant and the boards to have some discretion. Look to allow shared parking. So if it's not a new concept, but if you got a bunch of different uses in an area, they allow them to come to an agreement, have a written agreement to share the parking, because they may operate at different times of the day, different days of the week. Anyway, you can cut down on the amount of parking and impervious surfaces that's required. It's not an environmental benefit, but it's a cost saving aspect as well. But we still have to recognize that the U.S. is still an auto-oriented country, and Plattsburgh, having lived here in the winter, it's an auto-oriented community. So you're going to need to drive, and we'll assure you that we're not looking at getting rid of parking requirements altogether. So we recognize that there is a balance that has to be met.
One of the issues that has come up in the past in terms of parking and the number of adults living in a household is definition, which is just not really allowed to have a definition, but the kind of definition of a family that's been used for non-blood related people living together, which has allowed a lot of these poor students in an apartment who then require four apartments.
Right.
Whereas a family would more than likely, in most cases, be 2 cars and a couple of kids. When we think family, that's generally where our brains are going.
Right.
And yet, it's when you start looking at putting a lot of these poor adults in a family, you start to really rank out the number of parking spots that are needed.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. And the issue of defining family, less to do about parking, although clearly an example of maybe an unintended consequence of that. But that was more along the lines of communities that were restricting unrelated people living together.
So it's kind of been flipped the other
So
way
now,
in
it's a constitutional right kind of issue. But what it does now is that means that they have a lot more cars, and where are they going to put them? And so that's not to say that we can't look at that, but we're not going to, the parking requirements have to be based on what the need is. So whoever's living in the house, that's fine. We don't care. But if you're gonna, if it's a 4-unit apartment with X number of bedrooms, you need to be able to take a look at, is there enough parking? What on-site parking is available? Enforce the no parking on the lawn issue. That's issue here today. That's come up. So nothing's easy.
Yes. Don't envy.
Right. Yeah. No, very good point. A lot of things that we have to take into consideration. Anybody else? Yes.
I asked this, not at this last meeting, but the meeting before, about if Airbnbs were worked into this yet.
Yeah, and Jim had just asked that.
Did you, Jim?
Well, we recognize that the city has been addressing this on their own. So the question is, basically, I just put myself out there as like, should that be wrapped into this process? My professional opinion is yes, it should.
Definitely.
And I have not had a conversation with the city on that specifically, other than providing me a draft. But again, if it was my choice, I think we should be involved with that at some level.
It's come up with council obviously a couple of times.
Yeah. No, it just makes it just practical, for us to consider it.
Yeah.
Maybe ultimately, at the end of the day, ultimately, every zoning change, rests with the council. We'll advise, make recommendations to the project advisory committee, will consider and approve, and then eventually it goes through the public, and then there's another opportunity for input, and then eventually the common council needs to approve everything. So there's a lot of steps in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So we'll have a lot of eyes on it and a lot of points of view. If there's nothing else and anything online,
there's still 3 participants logged in. I can sorry, there's 2 logged in. I can pull them over. I don't know if anyone have any questions.
Yeah, we're 5 minutes past 7, so I want to keep everybody, but oh yeah, so if you didn't sign in, please sign in up here. It's great for us to be able to keep track of who's coming. And are the emails on there? I didn't take a look.
Yes.
There are. Okay, great. We'll just add that to the list. We send out information about the next drafts and the next public meetings. So, I think we're good.
I think we're good.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
that. Appreciate it.